Hi everyone and welcome to Riskologists. This podcast is brought to you by Optimise and hosted by me, Pat Bradshaw.
And me, Nicola Boyle. Optimise are thrilled to host this podcast series where we'll be speaking with some of risk management's most respected and esteemed thought leaders from across the UK and beyond.
Throughout Season 3, we'll be exploring our guest journey within risk management, as well as exploring key conversations and topics around the overarching theme of the season being the future of risk management.
Our goal is to create a platform in which ideas and thoughts can be shared in order to inspire and educate our audience, and to ultimately give back to the risk management community across the world.
So without further ado, let's get into it. Hi everyone and welcome to this episode of Riskologists. As always, I'm your host, Pat Bradshaw.
And I'm your other host, Nicola Boyle.
And today we're delighted to be joined by Hannah Wynne. Hannah, thanks very much for coming on.
You're welcome, good to be here.
Excellent. Have you done anything like this before? Any podcast game or?
I have not.
Have you not? How about public speaking?
Yeah, plenty of that. But yeah.
Well, hopefully we're not as intimidating as a room full of people anyway. We're actually coming in live as a bit of an Xmas special today. I think this one will probably be released a little bit after Christmas. So yeah, we're all sat here in Christmas jumpers. If anybody's watching on YouTube, you're welcome. For my health and safety jumper that's 2 sizes too small for me. But yeah, no, fantastic to have you on, Hannah. Thank you.
Yes, we always start the podcast the same, so a bit of a journey to date, so you can be as detailed and as vague as you like, just sort of run through your career to date.
Career to date, blimey, where to start? So I'll go right back to the beginning. As a little kid, for some bizarre reason, I really enjoyed maths and physics. Thought they were the best subjects. Then thinking about, university, what to do, what not to do, and jobs career-wise, I followed the money. So I decided the best paid job in finance was to be an actuary. Wasn't quite sure what that was all about, but I knew you needed kind of maths and physics to get in. So I started life as an actuary. Did that for 3.5 years, so lots of pensions, investment type work. But personally, for me, it was quite computer-based, I guess, as a trainee actuary. A lot of exams to pass and a lot of kind of theory and getting the basics right. Bit too desk-based for me. So 3.5 years of undertaking that, I went for a change in career and decided I would become a management consultant. Kind of did a bit of research, what's it all about, talking to people, being creative, coming up with different ideas. So I joined Atkins in the management consultancy arm, and then that's probably where I first got exposed to project risk. So worked on a project actually for Sellafield, looking at the decommissioning of the Windscale Advanced Gas Reactor. So got into quantitative modelling and thought, I quite like this, I understand it, this is quite fun. You've got the facilitation side of things, so the people aspect. Whilst I was at Atkins, I didn't just do risk, I did lots of things. So getting involved in business cases, getting involved in big projects, program management. So I was lucky enough to be working on a project that we were supporting Shell, which sent me around Europe at least. So I spent lots of time in Poland, Italy, Sweden. So lots of experience in that side of things. Started to get a little bit too focused in project and program management and thought I need to get back to kind of a commercial twist. So change of career path, joined Grant Thornton in their advisory department. Again, lots of business case work. And it was around the time when solar feed-in tariffs had become a thing. Mm-hmm. So there's quite a lot of business case and investment case work, which was very interesting, and also supporting the legacy part of the Olympics. Mm-hmm. So big mega projects. Then I had an opportunity to go out to the Middle East. So I thought that would be a good idea to go and spread my wings and understand culturally how they do things.
What year was this? Sorry, Hannah, how long ago?
Oh, blimey. Now you're going back. When did I go? I think it was 2012-ish. I'm not actually sure now. You've put me on the spot. I can't remember dates.
A distant memory, anyway.
Distant memory. But yeah, spent 4.5 years out in Qatar. So the World Cup has been and gone, but Qatar was kind of not very much there. So the whole city and the infrastructure around it was not geared up for hosting a World Cup. So did quite a lot of work in the rail space. So metro, high speed, tram, interfaced with all the other infrastructure projects. They had all the stadiums being built, they had all the roads being built, and as you can imagine, it was absolute chaos because everyone's trying to do everything at the same time for a particular deadline.
Mm-hmm.
But in terms of meeting different nationalities and cultures, it was an amazing experience. So probably every nationality of person that I met out there was doing a risk role whilst I was out there. And I suppose one thing it taught me is communication and keeping things simple. So if you think English isn't people's first language, but risk doesn't need to be complicated. I think we overcomplicate things quite a lot. 4.5 years, Middle East. I had my first child whilst I was out there, and then got the homing beacon, come home, be close to family and friends. Came back to UK and was doing a rail project in the Middle East, and guess what? There was a big rail project in the UK, HS2. So worked on that, again in a risk role, fascinating, being kind of client side, thinking about setup for all the big major contracts. And then it was probably just before COVID, an opportunity came up to work for the Nuclear Decommissioning Authority. I'd touched nuclear in the past when I was at Atkins, and it felt like an opportunity to be a bit closer to home. So HS2 was out in Birmingham. The role with the Nuclear Decommissioning Authority base is Warrington. However, there's quite a bit of travel involved.
Yeah.
So change of tack, moved over to Nuclear Decommissioning Authority, and then that's where I currently reside.
Yeah. Nice. In terms of the stuff when you were in like Qatar, was that all very, like quite strategic and commercial based, or was that trenches, QRA?
So a bit
Stuff
both.
like that.
Bit of both. So when I arrived, it was quite strategic. So first ask was business development, so try and grow our presence and our business out there. Then it was getting involved in a project called Aerospace City, which. So the Qataris had a wealth of money, and they were trying to figure out what is Qatar here for. Is it tourist destination? Is it just for the World Cup? What's its sustainable future? So got involved in a project there. So that was strategic in nature, setting up a holding company. Moving over into the rail project, that was more project program based. A little bit of enterprise risk touched on there, but more project and program. We interfaced with lots of consultants as well, and the contractors that were actually the people on the ground doing the actual enabling works or the civils works.
Yeah.
So, more about setting up frameworks, aggregating risk, information, pulling together program QRAs, etc. So
Nice. It's interesting you say about culture because, communication and culture and stuff, because one of the optimised guys, Paul Sutcliffe, remember when I first joined, he was telling me that he did quite a lot of work out in Southeast Asia, where naturally the colour red is actually associated with good luck and good things, and people might in different cultures like things like incense and candles and stuff when they're to pray and things like that, and they're doing it near potentially quite dangerous things. And he was like, it's really quite interesting and really broadens your horizons to be involved in those things, to really understand how to be resilient as a person and a professional. To sort of did you encounter many things like that where you were sort of what's always been black and white in the UK, or something like colour red, for example, is typically associated with something bad?
So I guess it was, and I kind of embraced it and said, I don't know how long I'm here for. Could be a year, could be 2 years, but why not give it all a go?
Yeah.
So first experience of Ramadan. So what that, obviously being within a Muslim country, how does that work? And then I kind of respectfully thought, well, I'll try it myself, see how difficult it really is, and it's challenging.
Mm-hmm.
So from that perspective, I went on a cultural journey, I suppose, and said, just immerse myself in it, see what you get back from it.
I was going to say, did your relationships feel like they were better because you were actually experiencing the culture more and you're actually embracing it? Yeah.
Yeah. And when I first arrived in country, it was me and it was that I was working with the locals, both male and female. And I just went open and honestly, and I said, look, I do not mean to do anything disrespectfully, so please help me. If I say something, if I do something that I shouldn't do, can you just point it out? So I kind of went in trying to do the best thing and the right thing that I could do.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was just a really nice soft landing into how the locals work, how they think, how they do business.
Yeah. But it'd be quite a different skyline now than it was when you first landed back in whenever it was, 2012.
And I've been back in the UK. This will help me sort out the time. So I've been back now 9 years because my eldest is 10, and we came back when she was 1. So yeah, so I've been back in the UK 9 years. And probably we're going to get to it at some point, but advice to anyone out there would be take the opportunity.
Yeah.
Go and see what you can do. The big mega projects, they kind of, they only come around once or twice. But if you follow them, you've got, friends that I know are mega project chasers. Yeah. So they just travel the globe working on mega projects. And the buzz and the atmosphere that you get from it is fantastic.
To be fair, I think one of the reasons that I was so intrigued by risk management was the sort of variety of things that you can say that you've been involved in. Like in my short career, I've only been involved. Well, I say only. I've done some cool projects in the rail industry, and it's cool to sort of, particularly in Manchester where I'm based, see things like tangibly taking shape, and you can say, "Oh, I've actually had some small part to play in that." But yeah. Anyway, I think that leads us quite nicely onto the topic for today. So, bit of a play on words: risk on the menu, balancing your appetite for success. So, I'm sure people can extrapolate from that we'll be discussing sort of risk appetite today, tolerance capacity, all those good things, which on the face of it might seem risk management 101, first week of what you learn. But I think in discussions with Hannah prior to this, I think there's some really interesting themes and topics that we're gonna get stuck into today, and hopefully have an interesting chat. So I guess obvious question, Hannah, we sort of always put it to the guest if there's anything in particular they want to discuss. Why did you land on this one in particular? Is it something that's particularly close to your heart, or something you've been involved in recently, or all of the above, or none of the above?
Good question. I think it's something that is possibly underrated and misunderstood, and trying to demystify what it is, what it isn't. So I guess throughout my career, I've been on a bit of a journey to figure out, is this thing actually of value? Because it's talked about a lot, but I've not really necessarily seen it work in practice anywhere. I've done quite a lot of research in this area, talked to lots of different organisations, said, do you do this? Yeah. How do you do it? Well, we've got a statement. I'm like, okay, but how do you operationalise it? Well, we don't really. So you don't do it then, do you? So just kind of getting under the skin of what is it? Is it useful? Because you think risk management, tone at the top, risk appetite is set by the board. So what is this thing? Does it really, what's the secret sauce within it? So that's probably why I chose it, because I've been on a bit of a journey to understand what it's all about. Is it useful? Can it be useful? And I think I've probably got a bit better understanding of how to use it, and it'd be good to spread the word a bit, I think.
No, definitely. I think there's a lot of people, especially in sort of our young career, like we're only a couple of years in, I think we can definitely benefit from this conversation, so I think it'll be really interesting one.
Selfishly we were quite like, let's do that one. As soon as you said it.
Just start off with, I'm sure a lot of people listening to this will probably know what you said. Look, we know what risk appetite is, tolerance is capacity, but let's just assume that someone who's listening doesn't know what those phrases are. Can you just explain what they are and how critical they are to effective risk management?
Okay, so risk appetite. So when we think about risk, it's all around risk to our objectives. So risk appetite is a maximum amount, and it sounds like I'm reading off a book. And I'm not going to tell you anything that you probably don't already know. So these are things that are sat within Orange Book, if you like.
Yeah.
So the maximum amount of risk that an organisation is willing to accept in pursuit of its objectives. So links very neatly into strategic objectives and risk management. Then you've got tolerance, so the threshold of risk exposure, which when exceeded will trigger an escalation. And you have thresholds that are visibly set as expressions of risk appetite. And then capacity is the amount and type of risk an organisation is able to support in pursuit of its objectives.
Okay.
So they all sound pretty similar. So appetite is kind of the big picture piece, and then, if you like, capacity and tolerance. So how much elastic band, if you like, are you willing to stretch against those strategic objectives to allow you to meet your objectives?
Yeah. I think that whenever I try and learn something, I always try and like pin it down to like one or two words. And for the appetite, it was very much, as you mentioned, like willingness to do it. The tolerance and the capacity, I think, when I first got into risk management, I found them quite difficult to get my head around it because they felt quite synonymous. Whereas I think in hindsight, tolerance is more around the boundaries within what you're willing to do versus the capacity is more the sort of objective measure, how much you're able to actually bear. So it's a little bit more objective versus the subjectivity of the tolerance, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So in my head, kind of tolerance is the black and white. When can you stop? When can you go? Whereas capacity, you've got that range. So how much range can you operate within? Whereas tolerate is, black and white.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so I am going to read from a bit of paper now because this question was a bit of a mouthful. So it feels like appetite is the line in the sand then. So it's an objective measure, albeit subjectively landed on, at which point you can agree with some degree of certainty. Sorry, let me rephrase that. At which point you can, with some degree of certainty, lean on in decision-making as almost like a go, no-go point, if you like. So in theory, it sounds like that's something that would be done early in the process and in line with tolerance and capacity statements. So I guess the question around that is that always the case? And do you feel like there's some level of correlation between an organisation's resilience and then their risk management maturity or lack thereof, if you like?
It's a good question. Because if you think COVID's really tested organisational resilience and has risk appetite, or is there a correlation between the two of them? So what I've found on the journey of exploring what risk appetite's all about, everybody, boards, individuals, implicitly have a risk appetite map, compass, call it what you want, already in their heads. So they already think they know what they can tolerate, what they can't tolerate. So I think implicitly it's already there, and making it more visible and putting a visible framework and a real simple tool set in front of people just helps people to have a common language, and also having things black and white. So is it in or is it out of appetite?
Yeah.
And we've always said being out of appetite, it's not wrong. It's just you know that you're out of appetite. So it just changes the kind of conversation that you're going to have about a decision and what next steps you might take. So in terms of kind of the connectivity in with resilience, I think setting your risk appetite as a board, probably you're going to be quite risk averse in some contexts.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why it kind of helps you to say, depending on, do you want to do business development? Do you want to be an entrepreneurial organisation? If you do, and we all do it day to day in different investments that we've got, you've got to take some risk in order to get those returns. So I think there's definitely a linkage, but I think it's implicit. It doesn't happen just because you've got a risk appetite statement or you've got a risk appetite framework.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if that's fully answered the question behind it. But
no, to be honest with you, when I was coming up with that question, I sort of knew what I wanted to ask, but I sort of danced around the houses a little bit. Yeah, you have answered it. Like I say, it was more, do we feel that resilience and risk management maturity is correlated in that you might go into an organisation and the assumption is that those statements would be made early on in the process, but that risk management level of maturity may not. Well, you'd have to be, I guess, extremely immature if that's sort of the the first step in the dance. I guess my next point would be sort of the biggest challenges that organisations do face when defining their risk appetite at strategic level. Obviously, you've got to balance things like ambition, caution, stakeholder alignment, things like that. I think, as you mentioned, it's always context specific, depending on the organisation and project you're in. But what have been the biggest challenges that you've come across in your career from setting those at the strategic level?
So just to go back and touch briefly on your previous question. So I probably agree with your point about, so if you are more mature in risk appetite understanding, then perhaps you would have a more resilient organisation. However, you could have some false confidence by thinking you're mature. And I guess it comes back to risk culture in the end, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Just because you've got perfect policies, procedures, processes, a risk appetite framework that sits on that, is it operationalised? Is it actually used in decision making? I think that's the question. And if it is, then yes, I think you could have a more resilient organisation. So coming back to your question that you asked now about what have been the challenges, I think it's been interesting dialogue throughout the journey. So some people have, in setting kind of, I suppose, your tolerance and your capacity, people have wanted to make it fit the historic decisions that they've made. So it's quite a mindset piece. You have to be in the right frame of mind as a board to go ahead and set your appetite. There's also different people have different experiences, and lots of people have had fingers burnt through certain project failures or corporate failures. And it's making sure that you've got that, I guess, facilitated voice in the room, that you're not swayed by one individual, that you should be super risk averse because of one incident that maybe happened. Mm-hmm. You need to have that rounded view and that balanced view. So I think they would be some of the thinking. Others are people just don't get it. They're like, what, how? Because nobody's ever seen it work in practice in different organisations. They don't understand the concept. Yeah. So drawing lines on a framework chart or capacity chart is a bit tricky. And the easiest way to overcome that is to say you've got to start somewhere. So if we all go in eyes wide open with, say it's a trial, say it's a pilot period, run it in anger, see how it lands within the organisation, test if the decisions are actually more robust and you're having better quality conversations, and then go back and have a look and say, well, what do you want to amend? What do you want to adjust? The other bit is about, it's meant to be dynamic. Risk is dynamic. Mm-hmm. The world is changing constantly around us. Don't set up a process that's really complicated and very time consuming to update. Yeah. Because again, boards are having, they will know what changes in risk appetite are all the time. So you have to have a process that's agile enough to allow you to change it based on the context that's there. Yeah. So I think that's probably a bit of a learning as well.
That preempted a question I was going to ask, actually, how sort of malleable those statements are to be dynamic and change. Like, it's probably a bad example, what you think, if you're changing a date or a cost, it'd be a rebaseline, have to go through change control. Obviously, it probably wouldn't be that process, but how are they quite rigid in terms of, we know what our appetite is? Do they get reviewed regularly? How would that process take place? Or is it just an overarching feeling that maybe our previous appetite or what we were looking at previously doesn't quite fit with how the direction this organisation or project or programme or whatever is travelling in at the moment?
So a lot of risk processes, procedures, you say, review them on an annual basis. I think risk appetite should be as nimble as changes in the context. So if you think about the emerging risk process and everything that we hear, things are changing all the time. You can't keep changing it, because then that does create a nightmare. But I think those big significant changes, so changes in government, geopolitical landscape that's changing significantly, you need to just take stock and test to see whether it is still fit for purpose. And all you're talking about really is probably changing your capacity statements and moving from, cautious, averse, are you now in a bold position? So the current spending challenge that we're in at the moment, that's pretty significant change to the environment that we're all sitting in. So things like that, events, cause a.
I wonder how many organisations actually sit there and go at strategic level, it feels like we're not in keeping with our risk appetite statement now, versus we've just pivoted and then we need to change that. That's completely different to what we're doing now.
And
doing it sort of in what's the word, retrospectively. Sorry, that's the word I was looking for.
Well, I was going to say, so we've got corporate governance code 24 is on the risk side, so it blows the trumpet for risk management and puts us right up there. So board, you are accountable for strategic risk. So if the board are not talking to you about it, then there is a problem. In terms of the challenges, so I talked around how is this actually operationalized? How is this used? Simple answer is just get it injected into your board paper templates that you might have, your decision making, your business cases. Get hook in there such that it asks the question that people have to answer. And then the discussion and the conversation can then happen in the boardroom or in your investment committees or whichever governance routes you're taking it through. So that allows the conversations
to happen.
The conversation's there to start. And then if the board want to be agile and discuss changes in risk appetite, they can do. And like I said earlier, it's not wrong to be out of appetite. You're just knowingly out of appetite, and then you have a different discussion around whatever topic it is that you're reviewing.
Yeah.
I think that'd be a nice little sound bite. It's not wrong to be out of risk appetite.
So that leads quite well into sort of the next question. So just how has the concept of risk appetite evolved in recent years since you started out, and then sort of what future trends do you think are going to involve in that and sort of shape the role of decision making?
So I don't think it's changed much.
No.
And then you kind of ask yourself, well, how much has risk management evolved? And some bits of it have, but the fundamentals are still there.
Yeah.
And I do wonder, because this topic, like I said, it's been around for ages. I've not seen it work that well throughout my career. So, and speaking to other organisations, nobody's kind of cracked the nut on it. So it feels to me something's a bit broken in how it's currently works.
Stale.
Yeah, a bit stale. However, maybe just keeping things really simple, demystifying it is the route to success. And it is just about decision making, better quality conversations. So I think it's probably been stale for quite a significant period of time. Injecting something different into it, not sure what that could be. I mean, if you think AI is moving incredibly fast, you can imagine a world with kind of appetite dashboards, showing things moving in or out of appetite. Again, what's that going to do? It's information for a decision maker to make. So I think the concept itself is probably going to stay around for a while. It's just how it's operationalized that has been not easy to find, I think.
Yeah, I sort of preempted a question I was going to ask later on with the weird shark analogy, but I might come back to that. Something that I was really keen to ask you, Hannah, I think something that we sort of touched on in the prep work was I've been working in projects for sort of 4 years since I joined Optimise, and unless I've really gone sort of rummaging through all of the pertinent documents to find the appetite, tolerance, capacity statements and stuff, it hasn't really been something that's been cascaded down from enterprise level into P3. So I guess the question is, firstly, how can we ensure that, firstly is that a conversation or something that needs to be discussed at that level? And secondly, if it is, how can organisations ensure that defined risk appetite is sort of cascaded down into sort of P3 level. I'm only speaking on behalf of my experience, by the way. I don't know if other people listening to this or yourself working in that P3 level from below the enterprise have found that appetite is sort of cascaded more effectively.
So again, another really good question. So on the journey, we found that exact fact that, you know, it seems to happen right at the top with board decisions, but does it really trickle through down to project level? I think it's useful as guardrails, so people know what the tolerance ranges are. I think it's really useful at early stage projects. So you're looking at, you know, initiating a project for a reason. So it is either going to introduce some risks, threats or opportunities, or it's going to help to reduce them. So again, I think that the same concept comes in. Create a simple way of operationalizing it so you can have a better quality conversation to know, what is this project going to do? Is it introducing a load of risks that are out of our appetite? And if they are, what we're going to do about them? Mm-hmm. And the flip side, and I think it's probably yet to come, is, so if you're thinking about kind of your capacity and your tolerance piece, mm-hmm. So if you've got a range and actually we are on the averse side of things, but we've got a range that takes us out to cautious, we might be over controlling our risks. So actually we're spending money that could be better spent elsewhere because we have got that level, range of capacity that we're willing to accept. Yeah. Are we over controlling? So that dimension, I think's something that shouldn't be underestimated.
Yeah.
And that can help free up money to mitigate further or other risks that might be more out of appetite. So I think there's that dimension that shouldn't really forget.
Yeah. Is the general consensus, like you mentioned, that it's not cascaded down particularly well, and projects and programs suffer as a result of that? Is there that sort of data out there, or is that quite difficult to quantify?
So I think it's probably difficult to quantify. I think it's those strategic decisions. So when you're thinking about setting up project space, so I'm used to kind of typical government procurements and going through the governance. So strategic outline case, before you throw money at a project, really think about what's the strategic objective of you doing that project. And if you're having those risk appetite conversations at that point, that's got to be more useful than having them kind of when you're at your final business case stage and almost the decision's made, a lot of money's already been spent. Yeah. It's really that early decision making that I think it comes into play much more usefully.
Yeah. It's like we were saying earlier with that rhetorical question, like, is this project within the appetite of the organisation? You'd like to think that had already been tackled before it reached project level. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I guess it'd be interesting to understand how that then fits in and how having that appetite could then set you up for better success, I guess, at project level and in keeping with appetite.
So just moving on then, I think we sort of touched on this, well, you just touched on this briefly anyway, about sort of how can AI and technology help monitor and develop risk appetite. I think you sort of mentioned, touched on, like, we could maybe develop like AI, like dashboards and everything like that. Is there anything else that you've sort of thought of that, just obviously keeping in theme with the future of risk management, is there anything that you sort of thought of or already sort of seen to do with AI and technology and helping monitor and define and develop risk appetite?
So I guess you can create a living, breathing version of a risk. So if you think about stock exchange, numbers going up or arrows going up, down, a risk is dynamic. It expands, it contracts, it changes. So I think AI can do a lot of that real-time, quick analysis that is information, again, for decision makers to make. It can also give you thoughts on mitigations that you might not have thought about. It can be clever enough to say, if you do this, it brings you within appetite. Had you thought about doing that? So again, quick fire ways of bringing you into appetite. It can also probably cost well, if you want to be within appetite, we expect that it's going to cost X amount of money. So again, all really useful information that decision makers or board would be interested in. So I think from that perspective, getting real-time information is going to be helpful to support it. It being AI, so we use the phrase augmented intelligence. So it's giving you additional information to help you make decisions. I think the way risk appetite lands best within an organisation is if it reflects the organisation. So a couple of approaches that I've come across throughout my career is using a narrative statement. So read a statement and see which one rings true. And you kind of, are you averse, are you cautious, all the way through to kind of bold and open. The more that relates to an organisation, the better. And a lot of people kind of calibrate on recent projects that they've done or recent decisions that they've done. So if you can calibrate with that decision was out of appetite and that was related to this particular project, you kind of calibrated your head as to what was in and out. So those statements that you can pick up, easily read, work well. I don't know that AI, it may be able to come up with useful versions of how to make it ring true to an organisation. And then the other one is just using a simple PID approach. So drawing lines on a PID to say what is in and what's out of appetite.
Yeah.
Again, it's pretty simple. Is it perfect? No, it's not. But you have a PID for a reason. It's qualitative. It's to just give you an indication of where should you spend your effort. So again, we've kind of tried to go for doesn't need to be perfect. It just needs to be more informed to help make better decisions.
Yeah, perfect. I think it all comes down to culture, like you say. Like if an organisation wasn't necessarily doing it very well when it was quite primitive, even pen and paper PID, what's to say that investing a load of money in technology is going to make a blind bit of difference? Cool. So I think we have touched on it a little bit in terms of how organisations adapt their risk appetite in response to things like rapid changes, economic uncertainty, geopolitical shifts, things like that. At the risk that we just glazed over it, is there anything that we haven't already touched on in terms of how organisations adapt that appetite that you'd like to sort of touch on a little bit further?
I think we've probably covered it really. Just about, whatever framework or process you set up, allow it to be dynamic. You don't want constant change because that's not necessarily helpful. You need a period of stability, but you need to be agile and be able to move with the times and whatever that external context is. Because if you're completely disconnected from reality, it's not going to help your decision making.
Yeah.
And people will then kind of lose faith in risk appetite, the whole point of it. So you have to be connected to reality.
Yeah.
So it's got to be agile.
Nice. Okay. Again, another question that I think we flirted with a little bit when I was referring to that shark example before. So I've probably just lost my mind, to be fair, but when I was trying to rationalise it. So the point I was going to get to is that it feels like appetite tolerance capacity has sort of been omnipresent since the start of projects and start of risk management and things like that. And at least from my experience and having spoken to people, that it doesn't seem to have changed a huge amount. The reason I keep referring to sharks is they stopped evolving like millions and millions of years ago and they've been omnipresent in nature and stuff. So that was how I rationalised it in my own head. How much potential do you think there is for further change in the future, in keeping with the theme of the future risk management? I know we touched on a couple of things in a couple of questions ago. Do you think there is a huge amount of room for change? Do you think it's more just a cultural shift in it be on the tip of people's tongues as much as you to say, oh, what are the company values that you work for? And you could just reel it off versus what's your risk appetite? And the board strategically, you could just reel it off. So yeah, do you think that sort of evolution is still incremental, or do you think there could be quite a steep incline to improve how we do things? So I think we haven't even got the basics right across quite a lot of organisations. So you hit the nail on the head with the, it would be great if the 30-second elevator pitch, knowing what are your values, you'd know what your risk appetite tolerances are. So I think getting the basics right, getting that embedded, getting it working, and I don't think it's any more complicated than having a better quality conversation. And just what I've found is having
having a framework or a risk appetite map, if you like, just allows consistent conversation with everybody. Like I said earlier, everyone implicitly has their own risk appetite from experiences that they've come to. When it comes to a decision making, and usually it's a collaborative joint decision that's made in certain committees or with boards, making sure that it is visible and it is articulated in a consistent way is incredibly useful to an organisation. So just keeping it simple and getting the basics right. Once that's in, I think you then probably move to different risk management tools to take off in different areas. But I think risk appetite, just get the basics in and let other parts of risk then take you in different directions.
Yeah.
That's where I'd put my money.
Whose responsibility is it to improve those conversations? Is it the responsibility? Obviously, it's the accountable people, the board members. But say, for example, someone in your position, a risk person going into somewhere where the culture might not be that good. Is it their responsibility to really drive those conversations?
So I think it's everybody, and you kind of go back to just because you've got risk manager in your title, don't look at me. I don't manage the risks. I help set up the framework and support you in that. So I think board definitely, and again, corporate governance really supports and helps risk professionals with that. They're accountable. They own risk. They need to set the tone at the top. And then obviously the risk professionals are in there to deploy it. So I think from risk perspective, the more you can keep it simple, whatever tools you're going to create to embed it, again, keeping them simple, don't overcomplicate. I think that's the way to go with it. If you talk about overall culture, that goes everywhere, doesn't it? So, awareness training with boards, exec teams, senior managers, it filters through. So it's, I suppose, at the heart of risk management anyway.
Yeah. No, makes sense.
I think we've probably answered this question anyway, but I'll just touch on it again in case there's anything else to sort of add to this one. But basically the next question was going to be sort of what governance structures and frameworks can help bridge the gap between board strategic risk appetite and then day-to-day decision making at other levels. So I know you've sort of said risk culture is a big thing and then keeping things simple. Is there anything else to sort of add to that?
So strategic decisions versus day-to-day decisions. Yeah, I suppose you've got to be careful that you don't just use risk appetite for strategic decisions and that it kind of filters through. Yeah. And this comes back to, if you have a very simple, pragmatic way of doing it, you should be able to use those tools to know, are you in or out of appetite for those day-to-day decisions? Because quite often it's those day-to-day decisions that can impact those strategic pieces. So I think it's about don't underestimate communication. Don't underestimate keeping things really simple.
Yeah.
Yeah. Nice. Cool. And then lastly, just before we go into the sort of riskologist tradition piece of advice, the final question I was going to ask you, I think we've done it till the cows come home. So I guess something a little bit more pertinent. What advice would you give to people who are listening who might have made that step up from being on the ground doing risk management at the P3 level and now doing a little bit more strategic? They're dealing with people who are at a high level, a little bit less agreeable. You've got to be a little bit more tenacious to really have your voice heard. What advice would you give to somebody who's making that step up, going from like I say, that level in P3 into the strategic level, and those conversations just become a little bit tougher?
So really good question. It's being a risk professional is tricky sometimes because you try to be everybody's friend to try and get them engaged in doing risk management, taking them on the journey. The other side of risk management is you have to be challenging and highlight, you're there as an independent advisor, if you like, to whether it's your CEO or your senior manager or your board. So as a risk professional, you've got to have that ability to challenge, and the two don't necessarily go hand in hand. It comes with experience, it comes with behaviours as well. So if you are respectfully challenging people with evidence. That usually goes quite a long way. But you need to be able to challenge people with a feeling as well. You know, you've got your finger on the corporate pulse. Something doesn't smell right. Can't exactly say why, but it just doesn't feel right. And your voice has to be heard. So if you've got an organisational culture that understands the benefit of risk management, understands that independent voice, that's the organisation you want to be in.
Yeah.
If you are not getting heard and you have an inability to challenge, you can't do your job.
Yeah.
So I think that's when you need to escalate, raise. So what other bits of advice? Go straight to the top, because if you like board are responsible for risk, you've got usually in public sector organisations you have an audit risk assurance committee. Again, they're your friend. They need to be supporting you. They're accountable for kind of endorsing frameworks. Lots of places you will go to where people don't want to look at process. Why have I got to sign off a process? Well, to ensure that you are legally compliant, if somebody comes in on audits, we need to have this. And by the way, this is kind of the backbone of what we're doing. This enables us to have those simple conversations because of that solid framework that we've got behind them. So stand your ground in terms of getting processes signed off. Talk about the landscape of risk, because that's what senior management want to hear. And don't be afraid to challenge. And if you are, the culture's wrong within an organisation.
I think that escalation piece is quite interesting, because I think there's probably quite a fine line between having to be a bit more tenacious just because people are either less agreeable or more difficult to get hold of, and then the other flip side of the coin is they're just rude and not listening.
Yeah.
And I think there's a bit, maybe not necessarily a fine line, but to the point where you would think, actually, could I be more tenacious versus I need to escalate this because I'm not being enabled to do my job properly. And I think as well, if you've made it to that point, you're there for a reason. I don't think you would probably be having those strategic conversations if you were an agreeable person yourself. So
just rounding up the podcast then with our usual question. So just keeping in tradition, what piece of advice would you give to your younger self that you now know?
So
it's a tricky one.
I think probably that last conversation that we've just been having, go to the top sooner.
Yeah. Trust your feelings.
Yeah, that would be my advice. So if you're never going to have perfect evidence to back things up. If your voice is not being heard, you need to get the support and escalate things. So I think a lot of people try to go from the ground up. I think going escalating things sooner rather than later would be the advice. And then just general advice: go for every opportunity you have. Throughout my career, I've had lots of travel experience. It's good to travel, but B, it's that cultural experience and understanding how to communicate with different nationalities, different cultures, understanding what works. So yeah, I'd get involved in the big projects, get involved in the small projects, just go for every different opportunity you can.
Yeah, I think all of the best things in life are on the other side of fear as well. I think obviously it would have been probably pretty unnerving to uproot your life and move to the other side of the world, completely culturally different. I know, I guess when you're there it's an amazing experience, but I know I sure as hell would be pretty terrified doing that. Just going back to the other point as well that you made, the other piece of advice is a really good analogy that the Optimised guys gave to us, is you've got to sort of be like a bee almost, like when it's trying to get in the hive, it might have every single entrance to the hive blocked by something else, but it's sure as hell it's not going to stop until it finds its way into to be able to get in. So yeah, absolutely love that. And then finally, Hannah, if anybody wants to get in touch with you to discuss any of the things that we've mentioned today, what would be the best POC?
I would say probably LinkedIn. You can find me on LinkedIn, so
nice.
Feel free to reach out. Happy to talk to anyone.
Lovely. We'll put your a link to your LinkedIn profile in the podcast notes. Yeah, but other than that, Hannah, thank you so much for sharing your wonderful insights. It's been a pleasure having you.
It's been great. I've really enjoyed it. Thanks for having me.
Our pleasure. Cheers. Thanks a lot. Thank you.
And that's it for this week. If you enjoyed this episode of Riskologists, be sure to follow, Optimise and Riskologists on all of our social media channels, where you can subscribe to the podcast and be notified of every episode so you don't miss a thing.
Please like, share and leave reviews to help support us and increase our reach within the wider risk community.
And join us next time, where we'll be chatting with another leading figure in the world of risk.
Until then, thanks for listening and take it easy.